Tonight, headed this way, tropical cyclone Alfred has turned, due to make landfall north of Brisbane. I'm Jessica Van Vonderen. This is ABC News Queensland. Authorities fear around 20,000 homes in Brisbane could be impacted by storm surges or flooding. The AFL bows to pressure and postpones Thursday's season opener at the Gabba. And Donald Trump pauses all US military aid to Ukraine after his fiery clash with Vladimir Zelensky. Good evening. Tropical cyclone Alfred is now on its path towards southeast Queensland. The Category 2 system is poised to make a direct hit on the densely populated region from late Thursday. Authorities are warning the window is rapidly closing for residents to prepare their homes and gather supplies. We have reporters in the warning zone. We begin our coverage with Emma Pollard.
Today's picturesque conditions won't last as Cyclone Alfred draws near.
Nervous. I've never been through a cyclone myself.
Sarah Mill manages a waterside holiday park north of Brisbane. Some people have cleared out, others are braving it.
They're just hunkering down in their caravan and hoping for the best.
Just make sure everything's battened down and wait till it goes through.
Jamie's been living in a tent for the past year.
Oh, look, everyone's doing it tough. Tent life's not easy.
With devastating wind and rain on the way, police officers have warned him to move. But there's nowhere to go.
We're going to have to hide somewhere, a building secure, really. I mean, my tent's not going to cut the mustard, really.
The system is on track to make landfall from Thursday night into Friday morning.
We can expect destructive winds, and that is winds in excess of 95 kilometres an hour mean wind and gusting up and above 130 kilometres an hour. And we're likely to see daily rainfall totals of around 200 millimetres plus.
It is a really rare event for southeast Queensland, but it is serious and it is happening, and we want Queenslanders to be prepared.
Brisbane's city cats have been moored or hoisted onto dry land. Many residents spent the day stocking up, generators in demand.
I hope I'm overreacting.
I've got me new whippersnapper here and I'm going to clean up the yard, make sure there's no loose debris and hopefully nothing blows into the house.
Supermarket shelves are being stripped bare, but authorities insist they will be restocked.
It's quite overwhelming in there. There's no loo paper, barely any actual essentials that you really need.
The hottest commodity? Sandbags. Stations across the city swarmed by residents.
There was a while where we weren't getting anything and we were in a vehicle line for about 2 hours before we even got a sandbag.
More than 100,000 have been handed out in Brisbane.
We can produce between 10 and 20,000 sandbags a day in full operation. Obviously, if the demand exceeds that, we will run short.
The Premier says schools will be open tomorrow, but stay tuned for information about Thursday and Friday. As for the dams, SEQ Water says they're not making releases yet.
What we wait for is to understand the rainfall, where that rainfall is going in catchments.
On islands just off the coast, authorities are door-knocking vulnerable people. Councils across the region are assessing the risk of storm surges for homes in danger of being inundated by seawater.
If you decide to leave, you need to leave before the event starts impacting you.
Helen O'Meara is trying to secure her unit.
You've got to protect your home, whatever you can do.
The message? Don't wait until it's too late. Emma Pollard, ABC News, Redcliffe.
Live now to Moreton Bay Mayor Peter Flannery. Mayor, thanks for your time tonight. What's your biggest concern for your region as Alfred approaches?
Jessica, we've had many briefs with the state government and the concern here at the moment is that the storm surge that could come anywhere from 0.5 of a metre to 1.5 of a metre on top of the highest astronomical tide as well. So we're concerned in some of our low-lying areas down there, how they'll be impacted. Door knocking has started today with QPS, SES and Queensland and council staff as well, letting people know that they could be in an impact zone there, to take precautions. If they want to leave those areas, they need to leave early, not late, not during the event, and also to be aware that flooding events could happen as well in those low-lying communities.
Your region has dealt with flooding before, but what about these cyclonic winds that are expected?
Yeah, that's the focus we don't want people to forget about. Sandbagging has gone crazy throughout our city at the moment, but the winds are the big factor here. We've never experienced these kind of winds before in my time in the 30 years living here. So we make sure that people secure their garden furniture, their trampolines, anything that could be lifted up and used as a missile in the cyclone when it comes through. Take precautions and secure them now while you've got the time to do that.
Mayor, 60,000 sandbags were handed out in the Moreton Bay area just yesterday. What is your sense of how well prepared people are?
Yeah, we're up to 110,000 today and about 2,000 tonnes of sand. So there seems to be a mad rush on sandbags. They're the new toilet paper, I think, of the COVID crisis. But people need to know that while it's important to protect yourself from flooding, the biggest threat here is the wind. The gale force winds are going to be coming through. Anything up to 130 kilometres can be quite horrific. So while sandbags are important, make sure you also take precautions for those gale force winds and only take what you need. We're seeing people take a lot more sandbags and actually selling them on Facebook now to vulnerable people. So take what you need, look after each other as well, but be prepared for this event.
Goodness, Mayor, thank you so much for your time.
No worries, thank you.
Well, there are fears tens of thousands of homes are at risk in Brisbane. Jack Mackay joins me now in the studio. Jack, the council's just released some modelling. What does it say?
Well, Jess, it shows almost 20,000 properties could be affected by flooding or storm surge when Cyclone Alfred crosses the coast. The council unveiled this modelling in just the last hour, and they say it's based on the current forecast from the Bureau of Meteorology. How this could unfold varies. It ranges from mild inundation in yards through to significant flooding in homes. Suburbs most at risk include Brighton, Windsor, Ashgrove, Morningside, Rockley, Carina, Indooroopilly and Wynnum West. Lord Mayor Adrian Schrinner has urged residents who are at risk to consider relocating ahead of the cyclone. The council has stressed that this is just a model. There could be impacts that aren't taken into account from the Weather Bureau's current forecast. Jess.
Jack, thanks so much. Well, concerns are deepening for coastal communities, particularly on the Gold Coast, with updated modelling there showing up to 6,000 properties could be impacted. Authorities say it's the worst case scenario, but they're still pleading with residents to prepare their homes while they still can.
As the swell builds, so too does the concern the Gold Coast will bear the brunt of Cyclone Alfred's fury.
This is expected to be the most significant system since 1954.
Council mapping shows 6,000 properties could be directly impacted, with Paradise Point, Hope Island and Biggerel Waters among the worst affected areas.
The rainfall is likely to be up to 500 millimetres in the hinterland, and over 72 hours I think we're looking at up to over 700 millimetres plus for other areas.
There'll be evacuation centres at Runaway Bay, Burleigh Heads and Nerang.
They're there for a reason, and if you need that, then we'll be there ready to receive you from 6 o'clock tomorrow night.
Surfers Paradise was all but deserted. Only the professionals braved the big waves, but even they had trouble.
I survived, but my board didn't. But yeah, I'm very lucky and very grateful that I got to ride it right whilst it lasted.
At Noosa, it was indeed the calm before the storm.
Right now we've got a cracker day and it seems so far away, the rain and the wind, that's for sure.
This morning in particular, it was so incredibly silent and still, with nothing really happening.
Beachside businesses are making the most of the free sand whilst also cancelling events. The Noosa boardwalk could end up underwater.
The low-lying areas along the Noosa River will be subject to storm tide inundation.
Torches, generators and batteries have been flying off the shelves.
It's definitely probably like double the amount of customers as usual day on a Tuesday, for sure.
Angie Lallick bought the last generator from her hardware store.
I'm actually doing the Our Father right now. Yeah, I'm scared. I'm really scared.
Volunteers have been helping elderly residents.
We started yesterday literally just door knocking the areas closest to the water.
Linda Moore lives just metres from the water but has an exit strategy.
I have neighbours with big houses, so I can even swim over there and climb up to their balconies.
35,000 extra sandbags were brought to the Sunshine Coast yesterday, another 80,000 today. But getting them to residents is proving the challenge with the long queues at the depots.
A 3-hour wait for some, but no stopping for SES volunteers.
Just be patient. We're doing the best we can and we'll try to get through everybody as soon as possible.
Jessica Ross, ABC News, Sunshine Coast.
The Cyclones forced the AFL to postpone 2 of their opening round games after a plea from one coach for common sense to prevail. The Lions and Cats were due to launch the season in Brisbane on Thursday night when Tropical Cyclone Alfred's expected to start making landfall.
The Gabba bathed in sunshine, unaware of the dark shadow lurking beyond the horizon.
Feels like we're back in COVID and there's all this uncertainty around.
A blockbuster sellout was scheduled to open the AFL's new season on Thursday night. A rematch between 2 heavyweights. That was until Cyclone Alfred.
It's just a game of football. The safety of family and friends and staff and fans is the priority. So that's why common sense has to prevail.
We're ready to play. And if the AFL decided it was safe in consultation with the government, we're on a plane.
But late today, the AFL ruled the match was off. So too Gold Coast's Saturday clash with Essendon at Carrara.
Our understanding is that also once the cyclone passes, there will be continued rain and the forecast rain will make it really difficult.
The Lions and Cats both have a bye in round 3. A rematch date isn't as straightforward for the Suns and Bombers.
It's a home game for the Gold Coast and we'll find a space for that in the season when we work around the byes.
Meanwhile, the Dolphins were due to host the Rabbitohs here at Lang Park on Friday night, but a decision late this afternoon from the NRL that match has been relocated to Western Sydney Stadium. Instead, the round 17 clash between the sides will be a Dolphins home match. Jessica Stewart, ABC News.
Let's get the latest from Jenny Woodward now. And Jenny, we've officially moved from cyclone watch to a warning.
That's right, Jess. As anticipated, the cyclone is making that sharp U-turn, which means it's on track to hit the coastline. Hello, everyone. Now, the first cyclone warning was issued at 5 p.m. Now, that means gales will reach the coast within 24 hours, and now those updates will come through every 4 hours. Tropical cyclone Alfred is 600 kilometres to the east and moving southwest at 20 kilometres an hour. It's expected to cross the coast as a Category 2 system overnight Thursday. And while the warning extends from Double Island Point down to Yamba in New South Wales, the current tracking brings it into the coast just north of Brisbane. Intense rainfall with 6 hourly totals of 200 to 250 millimetres are possible, and we could see 24-hour totals of between 300 and 400 millimetres, especially on the southern side of the system. Damaging to destructive winds are expected, gusts to 120 kilometres an hour, potentially up to 155 kilometres an hour, particularly near the core. In addition to the cyclone warning, there's a severe weather warning for a broader area south of Gari and inland to almost Yarraman and down to Warwick. And I'll be back with more weather details later.
Overseas now, the US has suspended all weapons supplies to Ukraine after the row between Donald Trump and Volodymyr Zelensky. The Ukrainian leader angered the US president again today after saying the end to the war was still a long way off.
The war of words ratcheting up.
He said he thinks the war's going to go on for a long time. And he better not be right about that. That's all I'm saying.
Mr. Trump angry that Ukraine's president predicted peace with Russia was a long way off, was then pressed on whether he'd cut off support for the country.
Who decided if you're going to suspend military aid to Ukraine? Have you made that decision?
Well, I haven't even talked about that right now. I mean, right now, we'll see what happens. A lot of things are happening right now as we speak. I mean, literally, as we speak, I could give you an answer and go back to my office, the beautiful Oval Office. I could go back into the Oval Office and find out that the answer is obsolete.
A few hours later, White House officials confirmed all aid would be paused and reviewed, leaving Ukraine cut off from the world's most powerful military. Last week, Donald Trump evicted Volodymyr Zelensky from the White House after their public blow-up. He accused the Ukrainian leader of acting like a tough guy because of US backing. This suspension of aid is clearly meant to weaken Zelensky's position and force him back to the negotiating table. The latest move from Washington also stepping up the pressure on Europe.
Tomorrow, I will inform the member states through a letter about the Rearm Europe plan. We need a massive surge in defence without any question. We want lasting peace, but lasting peace can only be built on strength.
In Ukraine, Russian attacks continue. Overnight, a drone hitting the town of Kharkiv. Any talk of a ceasefire seems a distant dream to people here.
I do not believe in it. Because look, everything was torn down. What talks? Who even believes in that?
Ukraine now facing an even more difficult fight for survival. Carrington Clark, ABC News, Washington.
Anthony Albanese has raised the prospect of sending Australian peacekeepers to Ukraine just hours after his government appeared to rule out the idea. The Prime Minister says all requests for assistance will be considered, but the opposition insists Europe is best placed to provide troops.
For more than 2 years, Australian troops have trained recruits for the frontline fight against Russia. But could they also join the Ukrainians at home to help keep the peace?
There's discussion at the moment about potential peacekeeping, and from my government's perspective, we're open to consideration of any proposals going forward.
The British Prime Minister has led the charge for an international coalition on the ground once a deal is struck with Vladimir Putin to end the war. On Monday, the Albanese government seemed reluctant to sign up.
Would we put troops or peacekeepers on the ground?
Again, we're not envisaging that sort of commitment, but we stand shoulder to shoulder with Ukraine.
Now it's a live option.
Australia has historically played an important role in areas including in Africa, in Cyprus, in a range of peacekeeping areas.
In terms of whether we should have boots on the ground in Ukraine, I don't support that. I think the Europeans have that task.
And so the UN convoy pulled out.
Australia last deployed boots on the ground in Europe for a United Nations mission in Yugoslavia over 3 decades ago. Ukraine says it would welcome the return of Australian peacekeepers to the continent. The Prime Minister will soon call an election, possibly as early as this weekend. And already there are signs defence will feature heavily in this year's campaign. After facing accusations of being weak on national security for his handling of visiting Chinese warships, Anthony Albanese signalled he's prepared to fight on territory that's usually considered a coalition strength. Andrew Green, ABC News, Canberra.
Hamas has accused Israel of taking the Gaza peace process back to square one as the Netanyahu government threatens consequences if remaining hostages aren't released. The first phase of the ceasefire ended over the weekend with no agreement on what will happen next.
A crying shame. Mourners gather at the last of the funerals for the 8 Israeli hostages returned by Hamas in body bags. Itzhak El-Garat's family blaming Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu for failing to secure his release.
The enemy who caused your death was not the one who abducted you, but the one that abandoned you.
Anger spilling over into the parliament too, as families of people killed by Hamas on October 7 were initially stopped from observing a discussion about security failures on that day. The Prime Minister heckled as he issued this warning to the militant group.
I say to Hamas, if you don't release our hostages, there will be consequences you can't imagine.
Hamas is accusing Israel of trying to derail the ceasefire by asking to extend the first phase.
Israel is pushing to return things to square one and overturn the agreement.
In Gaza, there's growing anxiety the ceasefire could collapse altogether, as another 2 Palestinian men were killed by Israeli fire in Rafah. The IDF said they were violating security restrictions and posing a threat. North in Jabalia, 45-year-old Ayoub fears for his family as Israel continues to block all supplies, including food and fuel.
If they do not let aid in, famine will return as before, or even worse.
This Ramadan, the family is breaking their fast, grateful for the moment to have something to feed their children. Matthew Doran, ABC News, Jerusalem.
Pope Francis is continuing to rest and slept all night after suffering a setback in his pneumonia treatment with 2 episodes of acute respiratory failure. The Vatican had reported it was caused by a significant accumulation of mucus and bronchial spasms. The pontiff required the use of non-invasive medical ventilation during his treatment. The 88-year-old has been in hospital for more than 2 weeks. Back home, the gender pay gap in Australian companies is getting narrower, but not by much. It's the second time this data's been published, allowing workers to see which firms are making progress.
For working men and women, different outcomes.
The national gender pay gap is 21.8%, which means that on average, for every dollar that a man earns, women earn 78 cents.
New data exposes the gap at every business with more than 100 staff.
56% of companies improved their gender pay gap in the last 12 months.
Qantas is celebrating International Women's Day by having more than 50 flights operated entirely by women. But for every dollar a man at Qantas makes, a woman, on average, earns just 64 cents. And at Jetstar, it's 54 cents.
I think the publication of the data is absolutely essential. It does accelerate change.
Brittany Carroll's story at pharmaceutical giant GSK shows how the gap can be narrowed.
It was about 6 weeks away from me going on parental leave and my dream role became available. My initial thoughts were, I don't even think I can apply.
But she won the more senior, better paying job, and it was held for her until she came back. The company's human resources boss says narrowing the gap takes time.
So this data is a really positive step to be more transparent and to be able to have a better conversation with employees.
Since our interview, the global company has dropped diversity targets to avoid breaking the law in the United States, where President Trump has slammed programs that support the inclusion of marginalised groups. Experts say companies here must comply with Australian law. Daniel Ziffer, ABC News.
To finance now, and the US share market suffered its biggest fall of the year last night. Here's Alan Kohler.
America's 25% tariff on imports from Canada and Mexico came into effect at 4 p.m. our time. There is a growing suspicion that those and other Trump tariffs might cause a recession in the United States, so it was interesting that shares in New York last night fell more than in Mexico City or Toronto. In fact, of the 3 markets this year, the US has performed worst, flat versus a 1% gain in Canada and 5% in Mexico. But let's face it, investors are guessing. They're in uncharted waters, hoping not to bump into something. The Australian market fell today as well, of course, down 0.7%, but the biggest falls were energy stocks like Santos and Woodside, because the oil price fell after OPEC said it's going ahead with a planned production increase in April. It was going to be put off because of all the uncertainty at the moment, but apparently Mr. Trump pressured them to get petrol prices down. And as if he didn't have enough to do, Mr. Trump also announced last night that he's going to create a US strategic cryptocurrency reserve. Not just Bitcoin, but also XRP, Solana and Cardano. Now, this chart of the Solana price is typical of what happened to all of them last night. A sharp rise followed by, wait a minute, what does it mean? No one knows. Sell. And the US dollar went up because of the tariffs, and the Aussie fell a bit as a result. Finally, a very interesting chart from Westpac showing the premium or discount of the cost of building new houses and units versus the price of existing ones, on average, across Australia. New units cost 10% more to build than existing ones, and new houses cost 10% less to build than existing ones. How about that? And that's finance.
Coming up on 7:30, footy's back, but not always on free-to-air TV.
I think for a majority of Australians, that first game when they turn on Saturday night, they're going to be questioning, actually, has the footy started?
A lot of people do not have Foxtel nor KO. They rely heavily on free-to-air television.
If you want to use it or see or watch, you've got to pay.
Are we losing some of our tradition?
It's a 4-on-1 inside 50.
Australia plays an unbeaten India tonight for a spot in the final of cricket's Champions Trophy. After playing all their matches in Dubai due to security concerns, India finished on top of its group after defeating New Zealand by 44 runs. The dry conditions will be very different for the Australians, coming off their rainy stint in Pakistan. ODI captain Steve Smith says India might have the upper hand, especially with their spinners in searing form.
The game's probably won and lost how we play the spin, particularly in the middle overs. Yeah, look, it's going to be a challenge. I think that there's going to be some spin by the looks of it, looking at the surface. And yeah, we've got to counter that.
Weather now with Jenny Woodward again. And Jenny, is there any chance that the cyclone will turn away before it reaches the coast?
That is highly unlikely, Jess. Hello again. The Bureau have high confidence in the tracking and the timing, so we are coming down to the pointy end. And just to recap, Tropical Cyclone Alfred, 600 kilometres offshore. It's made that U-turn we've been anticipating and heading southwest towards the coast. Damaging to destructive winds are expected with big seas and abnormally high tides, up to a metre above the regular high tide, causing erosion and coastal inundation. Now, the biggest impacts will be on the southern side of the system, heavy to intense rainfall. 6 hourly totals of 200 to 250 millimetres are possible, and in the 24 hours we could see 300 to 400 and potentially more. There's the risk of life-threatening flash flooding, and there's a flood watch for more than 20 river systems all through southern Queensland and northern New South Wales. The cyclone is expected to weaken to a low on Friday afternoon and track across the Downs and then down into northwest parts of New South Wales. So we've got a severe weather warning for wind and rain extending from the coast into the Wide Bay region and the Darling Downs and Granite Belt. Elsewhere across the state, we've had plenty of heat, particularly in the west. We saw temperatures 5 to 9 degrees above average, but Urandangi was the hot spot on 45 this afternoon. Pretty chilly this morning overnight in Oakey, down to 13 degrees. Brisbane hit 31 degrees, and right now in the city we're looking at 28. Onto our photos, and surfers have been enjoying the cyclonic swell, but it is only for very experienced surfers. Thanks, David. Laura said the cloud came over like a doona across a blue sky at Keppel Bay this afternoon, and a beautiful calm morning at the Atherton Tablelands. Thanks, Will. Onto the satellite, and as you can see, there's not much cloud across the country. The focus is on Tropical Cyclone Alfred, just a trough system coming through in the west and those few storms there. Interstate tomorrow, a sunny 34 for Perth, cloud clearing in Adelaide and chilly 19 degrees for Hobart. Let's look at the chart, and away from the cyclone action, we've had those storms over eastern and northern parts of the state. More or less more of the same tomorrow, but another very hot day expected in the far west. Let's check those forecasts, and mostly sunny across the north. Eastern parts could see a shower or two, and another hot afternoon with a storm out in the west, 43 for Mount Isa. Sunny over the interior, we've got a hot day again. Storms are possible north of Longreach, where they're heading for 40 degrees. And in the southeast, conditions deteriorating through the day, so do keep a watch on the warnings. Let's have a look at Brisbane now. 28 the top, showers and winds picking up. We might see 45 millimetres through the day, and of course damaging wind gusts will be developing later. Onto the bay, and we'll have winds above 34 knots and seas will be above 4 metres. And then we're going to start to see the wind and showers picking up tomorrow, with heavier falls about Thursday, and we're looking at some pretty big totals coming through Friday, and things will start to ease later on Friday afternoon. So Jess, it really depends on how the cyclone moves, as how the next few days play out.
For sure. Jenny, thank you so much. Now, just a reminder, if you are in southeast Queensland or northern New South Wales and need local advice or emergency information, tune into your local ABC radio station. You can find your local frequency at abc.net.au/emergency or listen via the ABC Listen app. And remember to keep a battery-operated radio handy. That is ABC News to the moment. Good night.